Welcome back to another explainer. I'm so incredibly thrilled you're here today because, well, we're going to do a bit of detective work. You know, when we think about construction safety, our minds usually go straight to the physical stuff, right? Hard hats, neon vests, guys on scaffolding. But today, we're taking a completely different angle. We're going to use corporate financial metrics as a magnifying glass to uncover the real truth about structural safety. Basically, we're going to follow the money.
So, how exactly do you put a price tag on a flawed foundation? It's a really fascinating question. I mean, if you're an investor or a stakeholder or even just a future client, how do you actually know if a massive construction firm prioritizes safety? You can't exactly go out there and personally inspect every single beam and bolt on their job sites. There's just no way. But what you can do is look at the financial footprints they leave behind when things go south. And it turns out, putting a price tag on a bad foundation is exactly what modern sustainability accounting is built to do.
Okay, let's dive into this. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. We'll look at the stakes of structural safety. 2. Tracking costly project rework. 3. Measuring monetary legal losses. And 4. Why these disclosures actually matter. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the stakes of structural safety. So when we look at the engineering and construction industry, and we're talking about the massive firms building our bridges, hospitals, data centers, and power plants, we rely on a really rigorous framework. It's called the SASB Standards for Sustainability Accounting. More specifically, we're looking at their standard for engineering and construction services, which goes by the code IFEN. This is basically our roadmap. It lets us take this abstract, kind of fuzzy idea of a good safety culture and translate it into cold, hard, mandatory corporate financial disclosures. But before we get bogged down in all the heavy accounting jargon, we really need to understand the stakes here, straight from the standard itself. It states that errors or inadequate quality in the project design phase and construction of buildings or infrastructure may result in significant personal injury, loss of property value, and economic harm. So yeah, we aren't just talking about pushing numbers around on a spreadsheet here. We're talking about real human safety and massive economic shockwaves. When a firm gets structural integrity wrong, the fallout is literally devastating. Moving right along to Section 2, tracking costly project rework. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that this is where we start looking for the internal financial bleed. It's what happens when a firm gets things wrong the first time around. Metric IFN 250A.1 requires these firms to disclose the total amount of their defect and safety-related rework costs. Just think about how powerful that actually is. It literally forces these giant companies to reveal their own internal operational screw-ups in plain, standardized numbers for all the world to see. But you know, what exactly counts as rework? Well, the standard is beautifully precise about this. It defines rework as activities in the field that must be done more than once, or activities that remove work previously installed as part of the project. In plain English, this is the literal price tag of a mistake. If a company fails to design or build something safely the first time, they have to tear it down and do it all over again. And that costs money. And to make sure companies can't just hide behind clever excuses, the standard sets some really strict boundaries, as you can see here. When they calculate these rework costs, a firm has to include the wasted labor, the materials, the design costs, the equipment, and even the subcontractors they had to use to fix the defect, the whole shebang. But notice what is strictly excluded on the right side. If a client just changes their mind and wants a modification, or if there's a formal change order revising the scope of the project, well, that doesn't count. This metric is ruthlessly designed to isolate the specific costs of safety and defect failures, not just, normal project evolution. Which brings us to Section 3, measuring monetary legal losses. So what happens when those safety failures aren't caught internally as rework? What if they actually leave the job site and end up causing real harm? Well, that is where our second key detective tool comes in, metric IFN 250A.2. This one requires the disclosure of the total amount of monetary losses as a result of legal proceedings associated with defect and safety-related incidents. If that first metric was all about internal bleeding, this one represents the massive external legal consequences of poor structural integrity. So the crucial point is just the sheer scope of these legal liabilities, which is honestly staggering. The standard forces the disclosure of all monetary liabilities paid out to opposing parties, whether that's from a trial verdict or a quiet settlement. We're talking civil actions, regulatory penalties like fines or restitution, and even criminal judgments. But here is a really essential detail to keep in mind. They specifically exclude legal defense fees and expenses. Why? because they only want to see the actual damages and penalties paid out as a direct result of the firm's failures, not what they paid their lawyers. But here's the thing. A company can't just quietly drop a massive legal loss onto their balance sheet and move on. The standard demands real transparency. When they report these losses, they have to describe the context. What was the nature of the loss? Was it a guilty plea? A civil judgment? They have to explain if it involved negligence. And, maybe most importantly, they have to detail their corrective actions. Like, what specific changes to their operations, their management, or their employee training have they actually implemented in response to being sued or fined?
All right, let's wrap this up with Section 4, why these disclosures matter.
We've been looking at these micro-level accounting metrics, right? But now let's pull back to the macro view. And this brilliantly illustrates how the whole system connects. Metric 1 reveals the internal operational failures. That's your rework. Meanwhile, Metric 2 reveals the external legal consequences, the lawsuits and the fines. By combining these two disclosures, you get this brutally honest, purely financial picture of a company's safety culture. It completely cuts through the shiny PR and marketing and shows you the actual, literal cash cost of their competence. Or, their incompetence. Because, as the SASB standard points out, the ripple effects of poor safety are profound. It goes way beyond just the immediate redesign costs or even the severe legal liabilities. You have to factor in immense reputational damage, which can absolutely throttle a company's ability to win new contracts. Plus, just complying with minimum building codes, that might not cut it anymore. The standard highlights that as climate change-related events become more frequent and severe, our buildings are going to be tested like never before. Firms that don't have airtight internal controls to catch design issues are going to be incredibly vulnerable financially. So I want to leave you with this final thought today. The next time you look at an engineering or construction firm's balance sheet, will you see the hidden cost of safety? The numbers are right there, waiting to be read, revealing exactly how well a company builds the world around us. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this fundamentally changes how you view financial transparency and corporate accountability. Keep asking those tough questions, keep digging into the data, and I'll see you next time.